The town of Grief's Hollow clung to the mountainside like a lichen to stone, accessible only by a single serpentine road that seemed to resent every vehicle that traversed it. To Aris Thorne, a folklorist chasing whispers of preserved Appalachian ballads, it felt less like a town and more like a held breath. The air was perpetually cool and carried the sweet, decaying scent of pine and damp earth, even in the height of summer. Aris, a man in his late 40s with a patient face and eyes that missed little, had rented a room above the general store from Ilara Vance. Ilara was in her 60s, with hands knotted from a lifetime of work and a smile that didn't quite reach her watchful eyes. She was kind, insisting he join her for stew and thick, homemade bread on his first evening. "The songs you're after," she said, stirring the fire in her hearth, "they're older than the bricks in this town. We don't sing them much anymore. Not all the way through." "Why not?" Aris asked, his recorder on the table between them. Ilara's gaze drifted to the window, beyond which the ancient birch forest stood, a pale skeletal silhouette against the darkening sky. "The people of Grief's Hollow called it the Pale Wood. Some songs are calls," she said softly. "And you never know what might be listening." The foreshadowing was subtle, woven into the fabric of daily life. Children played, but never near the tree line. Every porch had a wind chime made of polished birch wood, which tinkled not with the wind, but in odd, syncopated rhythms at random hours. "The trees are talking," a little girl told Aris cheerfully. Her mother had pulled her away, a brittle smile on her face. Aris's academic curiosity deepened into unease. He found references in the town's crumbling ledger to the quieting in 1883, where a third of the population simply vanished. The official line was a landslide, but the notes, scribbled in a shaky hand, spoke of the figures in the mist and the offering that walked away. His breakthrough came from old Nathaniel, who lived in a cabin at the very edge of the town's tolerance. Nathaniel's mind was a labyrinth, but in its center lay a terrible clarity. "They aren't ghosts," he whispered, his breath smelling of birch sap and thyme. "Ghosts are echoes of us. The things in the pale wood, they're echoes of place. Of a time before angles and names. The forest isn't haunted, Dr. Thorne. It's haunting. It dreams, and we are in its dream." Nathaniel described rituals, not of worship, but of appeasement. The birch chimes, the specific pattern of stones in every garden, the way everyone poured a little milk onto the earth at dusk, these were stabilizers, holding the dream at bay. "It gets lonely," Nathaniel muttered. "It likes new patterns. New stories. Every generation or so it takes one. Takes them not into death, but into the elsewhere. The gift, the older folk called it, with terror in their hearts." Aris felt the cold hand of cosmic horror then. This wasn't about vengeful spirits, it was about a vast, slumbering consciousness, a dimension layered imperfectly over their own, whose whims dictated the town's fate. The psychological fear was a slow leak, not a slash. It was in the way every resident would suddenly stop talking and listen to the silence, or how they avoided looking at any single birch tree for too long. The climax began with the bell. A single deep bronze toll from the old community hall, a sound that brought the town to a standstill. Aris watched from his window as faces drained of color. Ilara met him on the stairs, her own face ashen. "The gleaning," she said, the word foul on her tongue. "A child was missing. Lily, the bright-eyed daughter of the blacksmith. She'd been picking blueberries at the meadow's edge, the absolute limit of safety." The town gathered, not with torches and shouts, but with a dreadful, resigned silence. They formed a line at the tree line, men and women holding their birch chimes. They began to shake them in a specific, complex rhythm, a sound like rattling bones. "It's a trade," Ilara explained, her voice hollow. "A reminder of our patterns. A plea for hers." Aris, the investigator, saw the flaw. The ritual was fear. It was acknowledgement. It was feeding the anticipation of the thing in the wood. He broke from the crowd, not into the forest, but to Nathaniel's cabin. "How do you break a dream?" he demanded. Nathaniel's eyes were full of pity. "You wake up. But to wake this dream would be to unravel the dreamer. And us with it." Ignoring him, Aris ran back. The rhythmic chiming was growing desperate. He saw the blacksmith, a giant of a man, weeping silently. And then the forest answered. The mist began to coil out from between the pale trunks, not a weather pattern but something sentient, glowing with a faint foxfire luminescence. It moved against the wind. Within it, shapes coalesced, not monsters but terrible, beautiful echoes. A flutter of leaves that looked like Lily's skipping form. A shimmer of light that held her laughter. It was the forest showing them what it had taken, refracting her essence through its alien prism. The anticipation was a physical weight. The town's ritual faltered. This was the moment Aris knew. The offer, the acceptance of the new pattern. He did not charge in. He did not shout. Instead, he did what a folklorist does. He began to sing. Not one of the forbidden songs, but the oldest lullaby he had recorded in the Appalachians, a simple human melody of comfort and home. He sang loud, off-key, pouring every ounce of his own longing for a sane, normal world into the notes. Heads turned. The mist seemed to waver, the beautiful, stolen echoes within it flickering. The forest's attention, vast and ancient, shifted a fraction toward this new, strange sound, a pattern it did not recognize, a story not of fear but of mundane love. The blacksmith, understanding dawning through his grief, joined him. Then Ilara, her voice cracking. One by one, the townspeople traded their ritual of fear for a ragged chorus of human connection. The alien mist withdrew, slowly, reluctantly, back into the depths of the pale wood. The silence that followed was profound. Lily was found at the meadow's edge, curled asleep, cold but alive, a single birch leaf clasped in her hand. Aris left Grief's Hollow a week later. The town was grateful, but the gratitude was edged with a new, uneasy fear. He had changed the pattern. No one knew what that meant. At the last bend in the road, he looked back. Ilara stood on her porch, not waving. As he watched, she slowly poured a cup of milk onto the earth, her eyes fixed on him. And in his suitcase, wrapped in cloth, Aris carried a small, perfectly carved figurine he found on his pillow the morning he left. It was made of polished birch, and it bore an unsettling resemblance to his own patient, inquisitive face. The forest, it seemed, had a memory for new stories. And it was still dreaming. The town of Greywillow sat folded into the northern mountains like a secret the land had forgotten to finish telling. One road led in, one road led out, and both were often closed by snow or rockslide long before winter had truly arrived. Pines crowded the slopes so tightly that even at noon the light came through green and fractured, as though filtered by deep water. The forest was older than the town, older than the maps that named it, older than the stories the elders told in half-joking voices. Everyone in Greywillow knew the rule: don't go past the third marker. 3 weather-beaten wooden posts stood along the eastern tree line, carved with symbols no one remembered learning but everyone recognized. No one talked about why. Evan Hale arrived in Greywillow in late September, when the air sharpened and the leaves began to burn gold at the edges. He had the look of someone who paid attention, eyes that lingered on details others passed by, hands always half-curled as if ready to take notes even when he wasn't holding a pen. He told people he was a freelance researcher, helping small towns archive their local histories before they were lost to time. That much was true. What he didn't say was that he specialized in inconsistencies, the places where official records and lived memory didn't quite align. Greywillow was full of them. At the diner, Evan met Lena Crowley, the waitress who knew everyone's order and listened more than she spoke. She had grown up here, left for college, then come back after her father's death. There was a steadiness to her that Evan liked, a grounded warmth that made the town feel less closed in. People don't usually come here unless they mean to stay, she said, setting down his coffee. Or unless they're lost. I mean to learn, Evan replied, smiling. She hesitated. That can be worse. I know. The history of Greywillow was strange in its absences. Founded in the late 1800s by logging families, the town should have been full of records, accidents, disputes, births, deaths. Instead, Evan found gaps. Entire decades summarized in a single paragraph. Census numbers that dipped sharply, then rose again with no explanation. And always the forest. It was mentioned obliquely, as though the writers were afraid of giving it too much attention. The timber east of town proved difficult. Expansion efforts were discontinued. Certain areas were deemed unsuitable. The folklore filled in what the ledges would not. At the local library, an elderly man named Walter Briggs leaned close to Evan and whispered, "The woods don't like to be measured. Every time we try, something goes wrong." Like what? Evan asked. Walter's eyes flicked toward the window, where the trees stood unmoving in the afternoon light. Like people forgetting things, he said. Or remembering things that never happened. I. Evan noticed it himself after a week. Sounds in Greywillow sometimes arrived late. A door would slam, and the echo would follow seconds after it should have faded. At night, from his rented cabin, he heard a low wind moving through the forest, but when he opened the door, the air was perfectly still. The third marker became a fixation. Lena warned him when she caught him sketching it from memory. That's not a hiking trail, she said. It's a boundary. Between what and what? Evan asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she told him about the founding vigil, a ritual the town still performed every autumn. Lanterns were lit. Names were read aloud. No one crossed into the forest that night. It's not superstition, she said quietly. It's maintenance. That word followed Evan back to his cabin and into his dreams. IV. The truth came together in fragments. Greywillow wasn't haunted in the way people like to imagine, with ghosts rattling chains or specters moaning in the dark. The forest was something older, something vast and patient. A presence that existed partly alongside reality, brushing against it where the trees grew thickest. Long ago, the first settlers had discovered it by accident. The forest was not merely alive, it was aware. And it could not fully enter the world on its own. It needed names, stories, witnesses. So a bargain had been struck. Greywillow would remember for the forest. In exchange, the town would be spared. Every generation, certain people were given to the woods, not as sacrifices of flesh but of identity. Their names absorbed. Their histories rewritten. Their absence smoothed over. That was why the records were incomplete. That was why the town endured. Vade. Evan confronted Lena on the night of the vigil. Lanterns dotted the streets like fallen stars. The forest loomed beyond the third marker, impossibly dark, as though it drank the light rather than reflected it. You knew, Evan said. Lena's eyes shone with unshed tears. We all know. Eventually. Who's chosen, he asked. She swallowed. People who noticed too much. The names began to be read. When Evan heard his own, spoken softly but clearly, the forest answered. Not with sound, but with attention. The trees seemed to lean inward. The air thickened, heavy with the sense of being observed by something too vast to comprehend human fear. Evan understood then what the forest truly was, not a monster, not a god, but a threshold. A place where reality thinned, where human thought could be unmade and repurposed into something vast and slow and eternal. As the crowd turned away, because that was part of the ritual too, Evan took a step toward the third marker. He felt memories loosening already. His childhood home. His mother's voice. The reasons he had come here. Lena watched him, tears finally falling. I'm sorry, she whispered. Thank you for noticing us. Evan smiled, even as his name began to feel unfamiliar. Behind the trees, something vast shifted, preparing to be remembered once more. And in the morning, Greywillow would wake to another peaceful day, with one more gap in its history, and the forest just a little closer to coming through. Jonathan Thorne was, by all accounts, a man of comfortable certainties. A librarian in the quiet town of Eldridge, his world was one of softly clicking keyboards, the calming scent of aging paper, and the predictable rhythm of the Dewey Decimal System. His greatest adventure was reshelving the occult section, a duty he performed with a benign skepticism, viewing tales of cosmic horrors as the quaint, fevered fictions of overactive minds. Yet within Jonathan beat a heart quietly starved for a mystery his orderly life could not provide, a weakness for the unexplained he confessed only to his tabby cat, Ptolemy, under the cover of night. His strength was his meticulousness, a trait that led him to accept a most peculiar task. The last surviving heir of the reclusive Ainsworth family, old Miss Elena Ainsworth, had passed, leaving behind the decaying edifice known as Willowbrook Hall and a library of rare, uncatalogued books. Jonathan, renowned for his gentle handling of fragile texts, was commissioned to assess the collection. The hall sat on the very edge of the Whispering Wood, a vast, primordial forest that pressed against the manicured grounds like a patient, dark tide. The townsfolk seldom spoke of it, and when they did, it was with averted eyes and mentions of foxfire and odd angles. Jonathan dismissed this as rural superstition, though the first sight of Willowbrook gave even his rational mind a pause. It was not a house of overt malevolence, but of profound forgetfulness, as if the very stones were trying to slip back into the earth, their lines softening, their geometry subtly wrong, as though viewed through a flawed lens. The interior was a tomb of dust and silence. The library, however, was a revelation. Floor-to-ceiling cases held volumes bound in strange, faintly iridescent leather, tooled with sigils that seemed to shift under direct light. The air hummed with the presence of the paper, a low, physical vibration he felt in his teeth. As he worked, Jonathan found his orderly methods fraying. Books on celestial mechanics bled into treatises on dreamwalking. Botanical sketches of local flora showed routes that delved into impossible, non-Euclidean spaces. One phrase, elegantly handwritten on a flyleaf, recurred like a sinister refrain, that which watches from the angles of sleep. His first night in the hall's musty guest room, the dreams began. Not nightmares of pursuit or violence, but dreams of profound and eerie observation. He stood in a clearing in the whispering wood under a sky littered with stars in unfamiliar, geometric constellations. From the dense, black lattice of branches, he felt a focused, sentient attention, not from one source but from thousands. He awoke not startled, but with a deep, chilling certainty that he had been noticed. Days bled into a week. The line between Willowbrook and the wood began to blur in his mind. He caught himself staring for hours at the tree line, feeling a gravitational pull. The townsfolk, when he ventured in for supplies, grew taciturn. The grocer, a normally garrulous man, simply said, "The wood's quiet lately." Listening quiet. A conflict ignited within Jonathan. The rational cataloguer warred with the part of him that had always thirsted for a genuine mystery. The former urged flight, the latter, a dangerous curiosity, whispered for him to understand. The climax arrived on the eve of a new moon. He discovered a folio of maps, not of land but of oniric territories, the geography of dreams. One chart depicted Willowbrook Hall not as a building, but as a nexus, a thin place where the fabric of waking reality and the realm of the Watchers grew porous. The corresponding text, on the induction of luminous trance, detailed a ritual of focused meditation under specific stellar alignments. The rationalist in him scoffed. The intrigued, sleep-deprived man noted the alignment was that very night. A storm of internal conflict raged. It was madness. Yet the pull was undeniable, a siren song woven from whispered dreams and cryptic texts. His weakness, the longing for a true wonder, overcame his strength of caution. At midnight in the pitch-black library he followed the archaic instructions, a specific incense of dried herbs from the wood's edge, found in a drawer, a focus on the sigil from the recurring phrase, and the chanting of a sound that was less a word and more the vibration of a deep cosmic hum. The world dissolved. He did not fall asleep. He stepped sideways. One moment he was in the library, the next he stood in the clearing from his dream. The whispering wood was now alive, phosphorescent, every leaf and branch emitting a soft, greenish foxfire. But the trees, their angles were wrong. They bent in ways that hurt his mind to follow, creating vistas that stretched into impossible, repeating perspectives. And in those non-Euclidean angles, in the corners of reality his eyes could barely comprehend, they moved. The Watchers. They were shapes of condensed shadow and stellar glare, shifting like smoke trapped in glass. They had no faces, only a terrible, concentrated regard. Their attention was a physical pressure, a cold that seeped into his soul. The air vibrated with a silent, hungry curiosity. He realized, with a horror that stripped his sanity bare, that this was no haunted forest. The wood was not inhabited. The wood was them. The trees, the soil, the very air, it was all an extension of their slumbering, vegetative consciousness. Willowbrook Hall was not built near a haunted wood. It was a deliberate pylon erected at the edge of a dreaming, alien mind. The terrifying twist broke upon him. He had not been summoned to catalogue books. Miss Ainsworth, her family for generations, had been caretakers. The books were not a collection, they were a cage, a system of symbolic and psychic bindings to keep the Watchers languid and dreaming. His meticulous cataloguing, his rationalist rearrangement, had unknowingly disrupted the fragile order. He had not been reading about them, he had been unbinding them. A new vibration shuddered through the dreamwood. A wave of awakening interest. The angles tightened, the perspectives sharpened, focusing on him, the small, conscious anomaly in their vast, somnolent body. He felt their perception begin to digest his sense of self, unraveling Jonathan Thorne, the librarian, into raw data of fear and wonder. With a gasp that tore at his lungs, Jonathan wrenched himself back. He found himself on the cold library floor, the incense reduced to ash. Dawn was bleeding through the windows. He was back, but the second, more intimate twist awaited. As he stumbled to his feet, his body moving with a strange, fluid stiffness, he caught his reflection in the dark library window. His own eyes stared back, wide with horror. But behind his pupils, deep within the familiar brown, a tiny, cold point of greenish foxfire glinted, a reflected star from an impossible constellation. And as he watched, paralyzed, his own reflection slowly, subtly, smiled with a curvature that belonged to no human joy. The Watchers were not in the wood. Not anymore. A fragment of their attention, a single curious angle of their consciousness had followed him back. It sat now behind his eyes, nestled in the grey folds of his brain, watching the waking world through them. Jonathan Thorne, man of comfortable certainties, was now a cataloguer no longer. He was the newest and most fragile volume in the forbidden library of Willowbrook Hall, a living book, his every sensation, his every thought being quietly, patiently read by the thing that dreamed inside him. And in the whispering wood, the trees sighed with a sound almost like contentment, settling back into a watchful slumber, now possessing a window into the world of men. The town of Oakhaven didn't appear on most GPS maps, and the locals preferred it that way. Tucked into a jagged fold of the North Cascades, it was a place of steep gables, wood smoke, and a silence so profound it felt heavy. Elias Thorne, a historical architect with a penchant for solving impossible structural mysteries, had been hired to survey the town's founding chapel. But as he drove past the Welcome to Oakhaven sign, weathered wood depicting a sun trapped in the branches of a tree, he felt a prickle of unease. The surrounding forest wasn't just old, it looked intentional. The hemlocks and cedars leaned inward, their branches interlacing like skeletal fingers. Elias met his contact at the local ranger station. Sarah Miller was a woman of sharp edges and kind eyes, her uniform crisp despite the oppressive humidity of the woods. "You're the one here for the St. Jude survey?" she asked, her voice hushed. "Just a word of advice, Elias. Don't stay past dusk. The shadows in these mountains, they don't stretch. They reach." Elias chuckled, though the sound felt thin. "I've dealt with haunted foundations from Maine to Mexico, Sarah. It's usually just shifting bedrock and methane." "This isn't gas," she replied, looking toward the dark green wall of the forest. "It's history. Some things in Oakhaven didn't start with the settlers. They were already here, waiting for someone to build a roof over them." That evening, Elias pored over the town's land surveys in the basement of the local library. As an expert in Euclidean geometry, he noticed something impossible. According to the 19th century maps, the distance between the town square and the forest's edge was shrinking. Every 50 years, the town's perimeter was redrawn, losing a few feet of neutral ground to the trees. He found a journal from the town's founder, Silas Vane, dated 1884. One entry stood out, written in a frantic, looping script. "The geometry of the grove is not of this earth. I measured the angles between the three great cedars. They total more than 180 degrees. The space between the trunks is larger on the inside than the outside. We are not clearing the land, we are providing it with skin." Driven by a mix of intellectual curiosity and a growing sense of dread, Elias asked Sarah to take him to the heart of the reach, the deepest part of the forest, where the St. Jude's Chapel sat in ruins. As they hiked, the atmosphere changed. The birdsong ceased. The air took on a metallic, ozone-like tang. Elias noticed the trees were no longer growing vertically. They curved in parabolas that defied gravity, their bark etched with patterns that looked less like natural growth and more like cuneiform. "Look at the ground," Elias whispered, stopping Sarah. The shadows cast by the midday sun were pointing in different directions. Some fell toward the north, others toward the east, as if multiple suns were shining from behind the veil of the sky. "Sarah, has anyone ever checked the soil composition here?" "The elders don't allow it," she said, her hand trembling on her holster. "They say the dirt is holy. But I've seen things, Elias. During the autumn equinox, the trees, they pulse. Like a throat swallowing. They reached the ruins of the chapel. It wasn't built of stone, but of a strange, translucent obsidian-like material that Elias couldn't identify. The structure was an octagon, but as Elias walked around it, he counted 10 sides. His brain throbbed, trying to reconcile the visual input. In the center of the ruins stood an altar. It wasn't a place for sacrifice, but a viewing port. A perfectly circular hole in the floor looked down into a darkness that didn't end. Elias knelt, his investigative mind racing. He dropped a glow stick into the pit. It fell for seconds, then minutes, its green light shrinking to a pinprick before it didn't hit bottom. It transitioned. The light didn't go out. It turned a color Elias had no name for, a shimmering ultraviolet void. Through the hole, he didn't see dirt or rock. He saw a parallel dimension, a landscape of colossal, pulsating geometric shapes and vast, unblinking eyes made of starlight. It's not a forest, Elias gasped, backing away. The trees, they're not plants. They're the cilia of a multi-dimensional organism. Oakhaven isn't a town. It's a scab. Sarah looked at him, her face pale. A scab. A healing wound between worlds, Elias said, his voice cracking. The rituals the founders performed weren't to worship it, they were to keep the skin thick. But the town is moving. The organism is waking up. It's pulling our reality into its own. As the sun dipped below the peaks, the forest began to groan. It wasn't the sound of wind in leaves, it was the sound of a massive, ancient machine grinding into gear. The shadows Sarah warned him about began to detach from the trees. They weren't ghosts of people, but silhouettes of things that had never been human, stretching multi-limbed echoes of the cosmic horror beneath their feet. The ground beneath the chapel began to vibrate with a low-frequency hum that vibrated in Elias' very marrow. He realized then the true meaning of Silas Vane's journal. We are providing it with skin. The townspeople weren't victims, they were the biological anchors. Every resident of Oakhaven was a cell in the organism's protective layer. And now the scab was ready to fall off. We have to leave. Now. Elias grabbed Sarah's arm. But as they turned to flee, they saw the trail had vanished. In its place stood a wall of trees that hadn't been there minutes ago. The trees were moving in real time, their roots walking through the soil like slow-motion insects. The forest was no longer hiding its secret. It was closing the door. Elias looked up at the sky. The stars weren't where they should be. The constellations were shifting, forming the same jagged, impossible angles he had seen in the chapel's obsidian walls. It's not coming for us, Elias whispered as the first shadow touched his foot, feeling not like cold but like a sudden, terrifying absence of existence. We're already inside it. The last thing Elias Thorne saw before the geometry of the world collapsed was the Welcome to Oakhaven sign, now standing in the middle of the clearing. The sun in the wood carving wasn't being trapped by the branches, it was being consumed. Sarah didn't scream when Elias disappeared. In Oakhaven, screaming was a vibration that only invited more attention from the canopy. She watched the space where he had been, a human-shaped hole in the air that hummed with a violet frequency, and then she turned her back on the ruins of St. Jude's. She was a ranger, her mind was trained to categorize the chaos of the wild. If the forest was an organism, it had a nervous system. If the town was a scab, it had a perimeter. To escape, she didn't need to run faster, she needed to unbalance the equation. The air felt like heavy velvet against her skin, thick with the scent of wet copper and ozone. As she moved, the trees didn't just block her path, they recalculated it. Every time she looked away from a hemlock, it seemed to inch closer, its roots making a sound like wet bone grinding against stone. She pulled her mapping compass from her belt, but the needle didn't point north. It pointed down toward the center of the earth, vibrating with such intensity that the glass housing began to spiderweb. The reach does not occupy space, Silas Vane's voice seemed to echo in her mind, a memory of a document she'd read in the archives. It replaces it. To leave the circle, one must stop being a point and become a tangent. Sarah stopped. She closed her eyes, refusing to give the non-Euclidean geometry the visual data it needed to deceive her. She began to walk backward. She leaned into her secondary senses, the way the wind felt on the back of her neck, the subtle temperature drop that indicated a gap in the trees. The forest reacted. The low hum escalated into a rhythmic thrumming, like a colossal heart beating beneath the permafrost. The shadows began to coalesce, forming pillars of darkness that stood between the trees like the bars of a cage. These were the elementals of the Reach, not spirits, but physical manifestations of a higher dimensions, weight pressing down on their three-dimensional world. She reached into her pack and pulled out a flare, not for light but for its chemical heat. She knew the organism thrived on the cold, stagnant energy of the void. She struck the flare and the magnesium hissed to life, a violent spitting red. The reaction was instantaneous. The trees nearest the heat recoiled, their bark rippling like disturbed water. The shadows hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pipe. "You're not holy," Sarah whispered, her voice a jagged edge in the silence. "You're just hungry." She ran toward the town square, the flare held high. As she reached the neutral ground, the strip of land the town redrew every 50 years, she saw the townspeople. They were standing on their porches, their faces blank, eyes wide and reflecting the shifting ultraviolet sky. They weren't watching her, they were waiting for the transition to complete. Sarah knew she couldn't save them. They were already anchored. She looked at the great cedars that marked the town's boundary. They were leaning at impossible angles, their branches beginning to weave a ceiling over the entire valley. She remembered Elia's frantic realization: the space between the trunks is larger on the inside than the outside. Using the flare, Sarah ignited the dry, resinous brush at the base of the great cedars. It was a desperate act of arson against a god. The fire caught, but it didn't burn orange. It burned a brilliant, blinding white, fueled by the strange chemistry of the forest. The skin of the world began to blister. For a heartbeat, the geometry of Oakhaven buckled. The sky tore open, revealing not stars, but a glimpse of the vast, cyclopean machinery of the parallel dimension, gears of light and oceans of unblinking eyes. Sarah felt the vacuum of that world pulling at her lungs. She didn't remember crossing the line. She only remembered the sensation of falling upward. When Sarah Miller woke, she was lying on the shoulder of Highway 20, miles away from the Oakhaven turnoff. Her ranger uniform was scorched, and her compass had melted into a lump of useless plastic. She looked back toward the mountains. There was no smoke. There was no fire. Where the valley of Oakhaven should have been, there was only a seamless, unbroken ridge of granite and ancient, silent trees. She checked her phone. The GPS showed a blank green expanse. The town was gone. It hadn't been destroyed. It had simply finished its healing process and folded away from this reality entirely. Sarah stood up, her limbs trembling. She felt a strange, cold itch beneath her skin, a rhythmic pulsing in her own veins that matched the heartbeat of the forest. She looked down at her hands and saw that her veins weren't blue or red. They were glowing with a faint, ultraviolet shimmer. The forest hadn't let her go. It had just changed where she was anchored. Title: I'm a park ranger. Something is mimicking voices in the Pine Barrens, and it's getting better at it. Hey r/no sleep. I'm not supposed to be posting this. My boss would have my badge, and the local tourism board would string me up. But after what happened last week, after what I heard last night outside my own station, you need to know. If you're planning a trip into the deep woods, especially up north, listen close. I've been a ranger in the vast Pine Barrens Reserve for 15 years. I know it sounds, the groan of ancient hemlocks, the chatter of foxes, the silence of a fresh snowfall. Lately, though, the sounds have been wrong. It started small. Hikers would report hearing their names called from deep in the woods, voices that sounded like their companions, except their companions were right beside them, pale and confused. We wrote it off as stress, acoustics, pranks. Then the disappearances began. Not your average lost hiker. These were groups, experienced campers vanishing from sealed tents without a sound. Only their footprints would remain, leading deep into the forbidden, burnt-out section of the forest, the area we call the Ash Field. And the footprints, they'd often start human, but end in something deeper, narrower, with elongated strides no man could make. The local legends have a name for it, of course. The old Algonquin word, Wendigo. A spirit of endless hunger, born from starvation and cannibalism, that mimics human voices to lure its prey. A tall, emaciated creature with antlers and eyes like sinking moons. I'm a practical man. I blamed bears, coyotes, exposure. That changed with the Miller party. They were 4 college kids, documented their whole epic camping trip on Instagram. They checked in at my station last Thursday, all laughter and brand new gear. I gave my usual spiel, Stay on marked trails, no fires outside pits, and for God's sake, if you hear something strange, do not go investigate. Stick together. The boy Jake just smirked. Don't worry, Ranger Rick. We've got bear spray and a satellite phone. Their photos stopped uploading that night. The search party found their camp 2 days later. It was pristine. Tents erect, sleeping bags rolled, food still hanging from the bare line. It was as if they'd simply vaporized. But the silence, it was a physical weight. No birds, no insects. Just the smell of damp earth and faintly beneath it, the sweet, rotten odor of decaying meat. We found their satellite phone discarded near the Ashfield boundary. The last outgoing call was a 911 dispatch, filled with static and panicked, overlapping whispers. The clearest phrase from a girl named Chloe, it's using Jake's voice. But Jake is right here. And he's so hungry. That was bad enough. But the final clue froze my blood. Our K9 unit, a fearless German shepherd named Rex, led us to the edge of the ash field. He stopped dead, whining, hackles raised. He refused to go further, just pawed at something in the pine needles. It was a small, waterproof voice recorder, the kind journalists use. One of the kids must have dropped it. Back at the station, alone, I listened. The first hour was normal, laughter, the crackle of their fire planning the next day's hike. Then, around 1 a.m., a distant crack of a branch. Chloe's voice, nervous, "Did you guys hear that?" Silence her. Then, clear as a bell, from the darkness beyond the firelight, Jake's voice. "Guys, I twisted my ankle. I'm over by the big birch. Can someone help me?" On the tape, the real Jake, his voice thick with sleep, mumbled, "What?" "I'm right here." But the voice from the woods persisted, now tinged with pain. "Chloe, please, it's really bad. It's so cold." You could hear the conflict, the sheer primal wrongness of it. Chloe whispered, "But what if it is him? What if he sleepwalked?" The tape captured the rustle of her leaving the tent. Then another voice, this one mimicking Chloe's, called from a different direction. "Jake, I'm lost. The fire went out. Panic, shouting, the sound of running." And underneath it all, a new sound, a dry, rattling inhalation like wind through dead corn stalks and a faint, wet clicking. The tape ended with a final, horrifyingly perfect imitation of my own voice, the one they'd heard hours before at the ranger station, boomy and authoritative. "This is Ranger Edwards. The trail is unsafe. Assemble at the creek bed for evacuation." Now, they'd followed the order. They'd walked right to it. That was 5 days ago. Last night I was working late, filing the grim report. A blizzard was whipping itself into a frenzy outside, isolating the station. The power flickered and died, leaving me in the groaning dark with a hissing propane lantern. Then, over the howl of the wind, I heard it. My wife's voice. Sarah died in a car accident 2 years ago. I'd give anything to hear her again. "David." It came from just outside the door, trembling with cold. "David, honey, I'm so lost. The road, there was ice. Let me in. Please, it's so cold." My heart shattered and rebuilt itself in pure terror. I knew what it was. The thing was learning, adapting, digging deeper into our minds for bait. It had graduated from mimicking strangers to mimicking loved ones. I sat there paralyzed, my hand on the rifle I keep mounted by the door. The voice sobbed, perfect in every heartbreaking detail. "David, why won't you let me in? I can see your light." It knew I was here. It was playing with me. Then it changed tactics. The sobbing stopped. The voice flattened, losing its human warmth, becoming a hollow echo chamber replica. "Ranger." A long, rattling inhale. "So alone. So hungry. The door is pine. It is thin." Something heavy scraped against the outside wall. A smell permeated the sealed station, that same sweet rot, now mixed with the metallic scent of old blood. I did not sleep. I sat with the rifle aimed at the door until dawn bleached the sky gray. When the sun finally rose, the storm had passed. The world was a silent white tomb. Cautiously, I opened the door. No footprints. Not in the deep, fresh snow. Nothing. But nailed to the hemlock tree 20 feet from my porch, at a height of nearly 10 feet, was a piece of torn, blood-flecked flannel from Jake Miller's shirt. And etched into the bark beneath it, with terrible gouging strength, were two words. Learned vocabulary. It's not just mimicking voices anymore. It's learning to speak, to communicate, to lie more effectively. I'm submitting my resignation today. But before I go, I'm posting this warning. They're out there, in the deep, silent places where the winter never lets go. And they're getting smarter. If you go into the woods and you hear a loved one call your name from where no loved one could possibly be, do not answer. Do not even listen. Just run. Update posted 1 hour ago. They found my resignation letter on my desk this morning. They found my truck parked out back. But they haven't found me. The snow last night was deeper than they realize. It covered my tracks as I left the station. It's so cold. The hunger is a sharp stone in my gut. I can see the lights of a new group of campers setting up at the distant trailhead. Their fire is so bright, so warm, and from the trees around me, in voices that sound like friends, like family, like a park ranger giving an all clear, the chorus begins. I understand them now. The language is simple. It only has one word, really. Come. Title: I'm house-sitting my uncle's remote cabin. He left a list of rules. I've broken almost all of them. My uncle vanished 6 months ago. They found his truck at a trailhead, his coffee still warm in the cup holder. No body. No note. Just gone. The police called it a likely voluntary disappearance. The family called it a tragedy. Then, a week ago, a key arrived in the mail with a typed note from his lawyer. The cabin was mine if I wanted it. I'm a freelance graphic designer with a dying portfolio and a maxed-out credit card. A free house in the woods sounded like a lifeline. A quiet place to rebuild. The lawyer also included a sealed envelope in my uncle's tight, precise handwriting. For the cabin, it said. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a list titled in all caps, RULES for while you are there. I laughed. My uncle was always eccentric. The rules were absurd. Do not go into the woods behind the property after sunset. Not for any reason. If you hear tapping on the windows at night, turn off all interior lights and remain silent until it stops. Do not look outside. The generator must be shut off at 10 p.m. sharp. Absolute silence is required between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Do not bring any meat into the house. A vegetarian diet is mandatory on the premises. If you find a dead bird or small animal on the porch, burn it immediately in the metal drum out back. Do not touch it with your bare hands. Under no circumstances should you answer the landline if it rings between midnight and 3 a.m. It is not a wrong number. You may see a man watching you from the tree line. He will look familiar. He is not. Ignore him completely. If you break a rule, you must leave a bowl of salt on the front step before dusk. An apology. I dismissed it as the ramblings of a man who'd spent too much time alone. The cabin was gorgeous, a modern glass and cedar structure perched on the edge of a breathtaking, endless forest. Peaceful. The first night, I celebrated my new start with a steak I'd brought. I grilled it on the deck, savoring the defiance. Rule 4 broken. I left the generator running past 10 to watch a movie. Rule 3 broken. The silence of the deep woods was unnerving. I needed the noise. At 11:23 p.m. the tapping started. A light, almost polite tap 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 on the large living room window overlooking the deck. My blood froze. A branch, I thought. But there was no wind. I remembered Rule 2. But curiosity, that stupid human itch, overpowered fear. I crept to the window, peered out into the inky black. A face was pressed against the glass. It was my uncle's face. Pale, gaunt, his eyes wide and unblinking. A smile stretched across his features, too wide, showing too many teeth. He tapped the glass again with one long, bony finger. Tap, tap, tap. I screamed and stumbled back, scrambling for the light switch. I plunged the house into darkness. The tapping stopped. I spent the night curled in a closet, my heart trying to batter its way out of my chest. In the morning, there was no sign of anyone, just a faint, greasy smudge on the outside of the window. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, a hallucination, a cruel prank. But the fear was real. That day I found a dead robin on the porch, its neck twisted at an impossible angle. Disgusted, I shoved it into the woods with a stick. Rule 5 broken. The next night I obeyed. Lights off at 10 p.m. Generator dead. The silence was a physical presence, thick and heavy. I lay in bed, listening to my own heartbeat. The landline rang at 1:17 a.m. The sound was deafening in the absolute quiet. I jolted upright. It rang again, shrill and demanding. Rule 6. I clutched my blankets, telling myself to ignore it. On the 7th ring, I broke. I had to know. I picked up the receiver. Hello. Static, then a voice, a perfect mimic of my mother's, but flat and dead. Sweetheart, you shouldn't be there. He's hungry. He's been waiting for you. The line went dead. I threw the phone across the room. Days blurred into a cycle of dread. I saw the man in the tree line often now. Sometimes he looked like my uncle. Sometimes like my old college roommate. Once horrifyingly like my own reflection. He never moved, just watched. Rule 7 ignored. My apologies, the bowls of salt piled up on the step. They were always gone by morning. Last night I broke the final rule. I'd run out of food. Desperate, I decided to drive into town at dusk. As I walked to my car, I saw him, the man standing at the edge of the woods where the trail began. This time he looked like my grandfather, who's been dead for 10 years. He smiled that terrible, wide smile and beckoned me with a slow curl of his finger. And I ran. Not to my car. I ran into the woods. I don't know why. Panic maybe. Or something else, a compulsion, a pull. Rule 1 shattered. The forest swallowed me. It was darker than any night I'd ever known. The air grew cold and carried that sweet-rotten smell. I heard footsteps behind me, matching my pace but heavier. Crunchy, crunchy, crunchy. I ran until my lungs burned, tripping over roots, until I burst into a small, unnatural clearing. In the center was a structure. A hut woven from sticks and mud and bones. Animal bones, and others longer, whiter, that I couldn't identify. Hanging from the branches around it were tiny, intricate wind chimes made of feathers and teeth. And on a stump before the hut sat my uncle. Or what was left of him. He was impossibly thin, his clothes hanging off him. He was chewing slowly on a piece of raw, dark meat. He looked up at me and his eyes were black and bottomless. You shouldn't have come here, kid, he said, but his voice was wrong, layered with other voices, including my own. But you've been so noisy. So fragrant. The salt was nice. A good seasoning. The thing that had been following me stepped into the clearing. It wasn't wearing a skin anymore. It was tall, lean to the point of starvation, its limbs too long, its joints bending the wrong way. Its skin was the color of bark and stretched tight over sharp bones. It had no face, just a smooth, elongated head with a wide, vertical gash that split open as it approached, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. The uncle thing giggled, a dry, rattling sound. He likes writers, artists, designers. He likes the creative flavor. Says it's complex. I'm back in the cabin now. I don't remember the run back. I'm covered in scratches. The thing is outside. It's not tapping. It's scratching long, slow rasps against the foundation. The generator died 10 minutes ago. The landline is ringing off the hook. I'm writing this on my laptop, the battery at 12%. I can see him in the tree line. He looks like me again, but his smile is finally right. It matches the one I saw on the window. The final rule wasn't for my safety. It was for his hunger. The apologies weren't to appease him. They were to make me taste better. He's at the door now. He's whispering in a chorus of all the voices I've ever loved, telling me to open up, that I've written such a good story that the ending is just beginning. The salt is all gone. Title: My boyfriend and I rented a cabin in Oaxaca. He's been acting strange since he followed the children into the forest. We wanted an authentic experience. No all-inclusive resorts. Leo saw the listing for a rustic cabana deep in the cloud forest outside Oaxaca City, owned by a local family. The photos were stunning, mist weaving through ancient trees, vibrant orchids, a cozy wooden hut with a stone fireplace. The reviews, all in Spanish, called it Magico and Fuera de este Mundo. Out of this world. We should have taken that as a warning. The owner, Senora Anja, a woman with kind eyes and a deeply lined face, welcomed us. Her grandson, Mateo, translated. The rules were simple: don't stray from the marked trails, be back before dark, and if we heard children laughing in the woods, come inside immediately. Do not call back to them. It is the air, the wind, Mateo said with a practiced smile, but his grandmother's eyes held no such dismissal. She made a quick, intricate gesture with her fingers, a shape like a knot. The first 2 days were paradise. The air was cool and sweet. We hiked, read by the fire, felt the stress of the city melt away. Then on the third afternoon, the fog rolled in thick and sudden, swallowing the world beyond the porch in a silent, grey blanket. That's when we heard the laughter. It was high, melodic, the unmistakable sound of children playing. It seemed to come from just beyond the first line of trees, then farther down the path, then from the other side. It was a game of hide-and-seek with the mist. Chilling, but also strangely inviting. Must be from a nearby village, Leo said, but his voice was tight. We remembered the rule. We went inside. But the laughter didn't stop. It danced around the cabin. A little voice, sweet and clear, called out, "Come play." Leo stood by the window, peering out. "I see a light," he whispered. "Like a little lantern." "Leo, don't," I pleaded. The rule was clear. "It's just kids," he said, a strange, dreamy quality in his voice. "I'll just see if they're lost." He opened the door and stepped into the fog. I called after him, but he didn't turn back. He just raised a hand, a silent gesture to wait, and was gone. The laughter seemed to gather around him and then fade, moving deeper into the woods. He was gone for 3 hours. When he returned, he was drenched in a cold sweat, his clothes snagged with thorns. His eyes were wide, pupils huge. "They were so fast," he mumbled. "Little shadows. They led me to the most beautiful clearing, a waterfall. But when I got there, it was just a trickle over rocks." He shivered violently. I got turned around. The path, it kept moving. He wasn't the same after that. He was distant, jumpy. He'd stare at the wall for long periods, a faint smile on his lips. He started humming a tuneless, discordant little song. When I touched him, his skin was clammy, even by the fire. The next morning, I found his hiking boots by the door, caked in fresh mud. He claimed he hadn't gone out. But later, I found a small, crude doll made of twisted leaves and twigs under his pillow. Its head was a large, dark seed. When I picked it up, it was warm. That night, the laughter came again. This time, it was right outside our window. Leo sat bolt upright in bed. Not with fear, but with recognition. "They're back," he whispered excitedly. "They want to show me something else." "Leo, no. It's a trick. The Charney Keys." I finally named the fear, remembering fragments of lore I'd read. The little forest tricksters, the ones who lead travelers astray forever. He looked at me, and for a second, his face wasn't his own. It was sharper, mischievous. "Don't you want to play?" he said, but his voice had a layered quality, like many small voices speaking at once. He ran out. I chased him, but the fog was impenetrable. I only got a few yards before I lost all sense of direction. I screamed his name until my voice was raw. The forest threw my own voice back at me from a dozen different directions, twisted into laughter. I stumbled back to the cabin, sobbing. An hour later, he returned. But it wasn't fully him. He moved with a strange, skittering grace. His smile was too wide. He kept tilting his head like a curious bird. "I met their king," he said, his voice flat. "He is old. He is the forest. He gave me a gift." He held out his hand. In his palm was a small, perfect, incredibly lifelike figurine carved from dark wood. It was a miniature of Leo himself, but its expression was one of eternal, silent screaming. "We have to go," I begged. "Now." We have to get you to a town, to a doctor. No, he said simply. The king is hungry for stories. He likes our city stories. I have to go back. I have to tell him more. He looked at me and his eyes held no love, only a predatory curiosity. He wants to hear your stories too. I locked myself in the bedroom. All night I heard scratching at the door and the window. Little whispers in a language I didn't know, punctuated by perfect imitations of Leo's voice, my mother's voice, begging me to come out. To play. At dawn the noises stopped. I emerged trembling. The cabin was empty. Leo was gone. But on the kitchen table, where his figurine had been, was a new one. This one was carved to look like me. And my belongings were gone. My passport, my phone, my wallet. All of it vanished. Only Leo's things remained. I ran to Senora Anya's house in the nearby village, hysterical. She listened, her face grim. She made that knotting gesture again. Los Han Ekkays took him, she said, her grandson translating quietly. They mimic. They learned. They love new things, new voices. They will keep him for a while, wearing his face, learning his memories. Then when they are bored, they will lade his body to a ravine. We have to call the police. Search him. They will not find him. The forest hides its children. And now she looked at me with profound pity. You are part of the story. You are the lure. What? The thing wearing your boyfriend, it will come back. It will be almost perfect. It will beg you to come into the forest to find the real him. It will cry your tears. It will know your secrets. Its king is hungry for a pair of stories. She was right. I see him now from her porch. He's standing at the tree line where the mist is gathering. He looks so tired, so scared, so much like my Leo. He's holding up my passport, waving it weakly. He's mouthing my name, begging for help. But behind him, just for a second in the shifting fog, I see small, agile shadows darting between the trees. I see tiny hands, too many fingers, pulling at his jeans. I hear the laughter, muffled now, coming from his own throat. Senora Anya puts a hand on my shoulder. You must be stronger than the longing in your heart. You must see the lie in his eyes. The thing wearing Leo takes a step forward out of the mist. It smiles his smile. Come on, it calls, its voice a perfect, heartbreaking copy. I found the way out. I just need you to follow me. The worst part is the tiny wooden figurine of me still in my pocket. It's warmer, and when I clasp it tight, I can hear the faintest echo of children's laughter, and underneath it, a single terrified sob that sounds exactly like my own. Title: I'm a forest ranger. There's something in these woods that doesn't want to be found. And it's starting to imitate us. Hey, no sleep. I don't have much time. The satellite uplink at this remote station is spotty, and the storm is getting worse. I'm a Forest Service ranger in one of the largest, most isolated stretches of temperate rainforest in the lower 48. My job is solitude, silence, and the occasional lost hiker. Or it was. It started 3 weeks ago. We got a report of a missing family, a couple and their teenage son, from a backcountry campsite in Sector 7, a place so dense the canopy blots out the sky. Standard procedure, we go in. My partner, Jennings, a guy with 20 years on me and a face like old leather, was quiet the whole hike in. Quieter than usual. We found the campsite. It was wrong. The tent was shredded from the inside out. No blood. Just gone. But their cooler was there, still full of food. Their backpacks, wallets, phones, all untouched. It's the first rule of the woods. Animals go for the food first. Always. This wasn't animals. Then Jennings pointed his flashlight at the mud. The tracks, they were humanoid, bipedal, but the toes were long, splayed, ending in points that dug deep. And they were backwards. The heel print was where the ball of the foot should be. My blood went cold. Let's log it and go, Jennings muttered, his voice tight. Now, on the hike back we kept hearing it, a sound like wind through dead leaves, but there was no wind. A dry, rattling whisper that seemed to move just behind the next tree, always out of sight. It felt like we were being herded. We ran the last 2 miles to the truck. The official report blamed a possible bear encounter, But Jennings and I knew. That night over a bottle of whiskey at the outpost, he told me the old stories. Not the sanitized Park Service histories, but the ones the old-timers passed down in whispers. The stories of the Wendigo, a spirit of endless hunger born from starvation and cannibalism in the deep winter. It mimics human voices to lure you in. It's always hungry, and it's always cold. I laughed it off. Stress, folklore. Then Jennings didn't show up for his shift. I drove to his cabin. The door was unlocked. Inside it was freezing. The stove was cold. On the kitchen table his radio was on, hissing static. And there was a smell sweet rotten like spoiled meat and wet earth. His coffee mug was shattered on the floor. And on the windowpane, fogged from the cold inside, were 2 long-fingered skeletal handprints. The fear became a living thing in my gut. I started hearing things. On my patrols, my radio would crackle and I'd hear a distorted fragment of Jennings' voice. Cold, so cold. Once deep in Sector 7, I swear I saw a figure, impossibly tall and thin, standing perfectly still between 2 towering cedars. Its skin was grey, pulled taut over a skeletal frame. Its head was elongated, antler-like protrusions scraping the lower branches. But the worst part, it was wearing tattered fragments of a familiar green Park Service jacket. I reported it. My supervisor told me to take mandatory leave. Stress, son. It gets to everyone out here. They think I'm cracking up. Maybe I am. But last night it found the outpost. The power went out just after midnight. The silence that followed was absolute. No generators, no hum of electronics. Just the creak of pines in a wind I couldn't feel. Then the scratching. Long, slow drags of something sharp against the reinforced steel door. Scree, scree. I grabbed my rifle, my hands shaking. The scratching stopped. Then from right outside my window came a voice. It was Jennings' voice, but wrong. Hollow, echoing, like it was being forced through a frozen pipe. Let me in. I'm so hungry. I can smell your warmth. I didn't move. I couldn't breathe. The voice shifted, warped, becoming a chorus of whispers I almost recognized, the missing family. A child's plea, a woman's sob, all layered over that same unbearable hunger. Just a taste, we are so cold. Then a new sound. A heavy thump on the roof. Then another. Thump, thump, thump. It was circling, crawling on all fours. I saw a shadow blot out the moon through the skylight, a spindly, distorted limb, too many joints. It spoke again, this time in my own mother's voice, a perfect mimic of her phone call from last week. Honey, are you eating enough? You sound thin. I screamed. I fired a shot through the ceiling. The thing let out a sound that wasn't a sound, a piercing, silent pressure in my skull that felt like ice cracking. Then silence. Dawn came. I found deep, backwards gouges in the steel door. The roof was scarred with long, parallel scratches. They're sending a chopper to extract me at noon tomorrow. Security concern, they said. I'm writing this now, waiting. The storm has sealed me in. The radio's been dead for hours. But the satellite link is still flickering. Here's the twist, no sleep. The part that's freezing my soul. 30 minutes ago, the power flickered back on. The security monitor for the exterior camera booted up. It shows a grainy, snow-swept image of the front of the outpost. My truck, the woods, and sitting on the steps, clear as day, his back to the camera, is a man in a ranger's jacket. It's me. I'm watching myself sit out there in the blizzard. I can see my own hunched shoulders, my own hat. But I'm in here. I'm typing this. The thing on the steps just slowly turned its head. It's looking directly into the camera lens. It's smiling, and it's holding up my missing Park Service radio. The speaker on my desk just crackled to life. My own voice, dripping with a hunger I've never felt, whispered through it. Almost time to come home. The chopper won't make it through this storm. I hear the scratching again. Not on the door this time. It's coming from inside the walls.